Welcome to episode 114 of the Half Point Per Podcast. I'm your host, Evan Riggs, and it's the triumphant return of producer Johnny Pham. Co-host Dalton Willie is 12 minutes away. I am just finding out. So we're not going to have all three. Johnny's going to be dipping out in about 10 minutes, but had to start the show at this time so we could get Johnny on for just a few. I guess, first of all, Johnny, before we jump right into it, how was Europe? I mean, you were everywhere.
Oh man, it's good to be back. It's been a chaotic last 20 days of just getting married, honeymoon in Europe, jet lag like no other. I barely sleep schedule's terrible. But when we got to Europe, jet lag was non-existent. But when we came back, it's just been
well, because you were excited to be there. You weren't excited to come back to reality, I'm sure.
Yeah, and like the sleep schedule's just been off. We'd wake up at like 4 a.m. It's like, I guess we need to just unpack, do some laundry, clean the house, and that's been the last like 3 days. So that's the tidal wave we're on. Didn't see a whole lot of NFL jerseys in Europe at all. Really barely any. Thought I would snap some or get some pictures of some, but didn't really see a whole lot. So that's unfortunate. But yeah,
I think you need to be in Germany. I think Germany is like it seems like the NFL's pretty big in Germany, because you guys didn't go to England either, right?
No.
So London maybe would have been another one. Yeah, I don't.
Yeah,
I've never heard any
main one.
Never heard any rumblings of like a Paris NFL game, so it may not be too big over there yet. So how many countries were you guys in?
So we went to Paris, Venice, Rome, and then the Amalfi Coast, and then Copenhagen. So 5 cities and I think 3 countries.
So which is the favorite of the 3 countries?
I think Italy's up there. Like the food was just tremendous.
Favorite food you ate in Italy?
Dude, carbonara. Carbonara is amazing. And like I literally think anytime I saw it on the menu, I was like, I gotta get it. And then by probably like day 10 of ordering it, every single time we saw it in a restaurant, I knew when it was gonna be a bad carbonara or a pristine carbonara, depending on like how much like grease or oil is at the bottom. And I was like, but then also like risotto is amazing with like seafood because we're by the ocean. So the seafood in the risotto was great. But one time we ordered and the server thought we were just classic Americans, not knowing what we ordered.
Did you guys get pizza?
We did get.
I was gonna say they maybe thought you were classic Americans because you were eating pizza.
No, so I ordered risotto and he comes out with the plate and it's like seafood and rice. I was like, sir, it is not just seafood and rice. You say risotto, that's what I ordered. Don't make me seem like a 6-year-old. And I was so offended. I was like, what in the world?
Well,
pizza was great. Trip was good.
Italy is the official country of the Half Point Per Podcast. Glad to hear it. All right, Johnny, let's jump into a couple of props, then we'll get you out of here off to your big-time kickball game tonight. We'll start with Justin Fields. His over-under for passing yards is set at 2,850.5, minus 110 on both the over and the under. I'll let you go, and I won't give too much reasoning right now because I handpicked these mostly so Dalton and I would disagree multiple times this week. So he and I will probably go at it a little bit more. But Justin Fields, your take on this prop?
Yeah, I like the over. I feel like the weapons that they brought in, the semi-better protection he's going to have this year, just being in the system. I think he's a great passer. I think it's just – I forgot. I think you and Dalton were having the beef of Justin Fields, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I think he's a great passer. I wouldn't
say great, but I would say he's not as bad as his numbers
portrayed. Yeah. So, like, I think he will – take a jump up this year with like passing yard numbers with like the weapons that are around him. And I like the over. I necessarily want to take it to the sports book with it, but I think the over is a good option.
Yep, I'm with you. And again, I'll expand more on that with Dalton when he gets here. Dameon Pierce, his over under 900.5 rushing yards, minus 105 on the over. minus 115 on the under.
I didn't do a whole lot of research as I just hungover every single day and potentially still hungover from the wedding night. But I'm just gonna say let's just go with the over. Don't really have a lot of background knowledge to it, but let's just say the over on this one.
Yep, you and I are in lockstep. I'm almost positive Dalton's going to go the under here. Here, I'll throw something out. Damian Pierce, 4th in the NFL in broken tackles last year, in the same class as guys like Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, Ramondre Stevenson, and Jonathan Taylor. I know Dalton will bring up the efficiency stuff later on as we talk. The guy did average 5.35 yards per carry against stack boxes last year. I just think he needs a little bit of a better offense this year. And even though he's a rookie quarterback in CJ Stroud, it should be better than what they had last year. Darren Waller, obviously, Johnny, Dalton, and I went back and forth on this one. Over under 700.5 receiving yards. I'm on the under. If memory serves, you were on my side in the debate.
Oh, yeah.
But are you on the over or the under on this line?
I like the over on this line. I feel like he's finally healthy, has a competent enough quarterback. And I feel like 700 is like not that much of like a yardage prop, but I think he hits the over on this one.
Mm-hmm. It's definitely not one that I feel exceedingly confident because it's,
I don't feel confident in any of these.
It's mostly health based.
Yeah.
Here, Donovan Peoples-Jones, over under 500.5 receiving yards, minus 115 on the over, minus 105 on the under. He has hit this the last 2 years, but I really wanted to bring this up because I wanted to talk a little bit about whether we think this is going to be a, 3 receivers can be somewhat valuable, or if we think that Elijah Moore and Amari Cooper are the 1-2, and then there's a gap. I'm more on that train of thought. So I'm on the under, but I'm curious what you think here, Johnny. Also, Cedric Tillman in the picture there too.
I like the over just purely on he's just a freak athlete. I like what the Browns have been doing with like their receiving core, at least with like bringing in Amari Cooper. Did they drafted Donovan Peoples-Jones, right?
They drafted people. They drafted Peoples-Jones, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I like his frame. I think this is an achievable number for him.
Oh, yeah.
I feel like he'll just have like 1 or 2 100-yard games, and then you're kind of pretty much in the clear after that. Because
it's possible. I'm just taking the under. A little scared of the top 2 guys there, and also very terrified of Deshaun Watson, who we've talked about a lot here. We don't even know if he's still good at this point. All right, Johnny, last one, then we'll get you out of here. Justin Herbert, over under 4,450.5 passing yards. Again, minus 115 on the over, minus 105 on the under. New offensive coordinator, should be an upgrade. Are you on the over, or are you fading the Chargers?
I think I'm on the over. I feel like Justin hasn't done anything to really make us think that he won't hit that. I'm not sure what his numbers are the last couple of years, but
I think he's hit the last 2 years.
Yeah, I don't think really much will change of this. I think the offensive coordinator is gonna make calls and decisions based on like Justin's strengths and like what's best for the team. But I think he'll hit the over here.
Yep, agree with you. I'm taking the over. He's hit this the last couple of years. Obviously, with passing numbers, they can't get the prop like terribly high. Like they're not going to put this at 4,800 because no one's betting over on that. So that's part of it. But I think like if you were making a list of 3 guys to lead the league in passing yards, I think Herbert is second or third on that list. It's like Mahomes, Herbert, Burrow in some order after Mahomes, I think. But yeah, all right, Johnny, 6:11. You need to get out of here.
Yep. I do.
All righty. I'm going to just play drops for 5 minutes till Dalton gets here.
It looks like he's on the highway, so he's en route, but we'll see what time he actually shows up.
Thank God. You're going to have fun listening back to this one.
Yeah, that'll be it.
All right, Johnny is out of here. We are waiting for Dalton to get back so he can join the podcast. I didn't mention off the top, so I'll mention it now. This is the My Guys episode we are going to be talking about. Guys that Dalton and I we are finding ourselves leaving drafts with these guys more often than not. If not, like some of these guys, it's almost every time for me because one or two of mine are late enough where you can really zero in on the target and make it happen. So we'll get to that. That's always fun. So that'll be a fun conversation, I'm sure. To look back at some of the guys last year to give you an idea of how we did last season, it was a little bit up and down, but lists like this are going to be up and down because, I mean, we're making a definitive call on guys that are in the mid rounds. Like we're not saying, oh, Nick Chubb, Jonathan Taylor. Well, Jonathan Taylor's probably not a good example right now, but Nick Chubb, Christian McCaffrey, Patrick Mahomes, that's a my guy. Like we're trying to be a little bit more bold than that to make the information more helpful to you, the listener. But looking back at last year, my guys, Khalil Herbert, which I think worked out pretty well. Rashad Bateman, that was injury. That was a bummer. Technically didn't work out. I think it would have worked out fairly well if he didn't get hurt and his quarterback also didn't get hurt on top of that. AJ Dillon, that was the bad call. I was all over taking Dillon the 4th round. Thought that was great RB2. I mean, you could take him later than that. So like I was taking him early 5th, late 4th, and was feeling great about him as my RB2. And it turned out you could not really start AJ Dillon. So that was an unfortunate call. Ramondre Stevenson, definitely my best call of this list last year. If you'll remember, he was going behind Damian Harris at this point last year. And I think he eked clear up to just about even with Harris, maybe a spot or two behind. But I had him like mid 20s amongst running backs. And that was still like low. Like that was still low among where he finished, but that was still also higher than consensus. Juju Smith-Schuster, I know the season did not end very well. He got banged up late in the year, and he was a little slow starting. I still think, by and large, if you drafted Juju, which you drafted him probably as either your last starter or your first bench guy, I think you ended up pretty happy with the contributions of Juju based on his draft position, even though like it wasn't as good as it could have been. If he would have stayed healthy, didn't have the concussion, he had the knee issues that plagued him down the stretch. But he had a stretch there where he was a top 10 receiver for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, something like that. So he at least I think was an okay call last year. Dalton also had Juju, so again, decent call there. Cortland Sutton, probably one of Dalton's more unfortunate ones. Trey Lance, another one that was injury, so we don't know how that would have worked out. We still don't know how Trey Lance is going to work out. I'll get to that in a minute. Aaron Jones, great call. Like it's not that Aaron Jones finished that much higher than where he was being drafted, and he actually may not have done quite what Dalton had hoped for. But basically, you know, if you took away from Dalton's list, draft Aaron Jones, then that worked out. That worked out. I mean, you were happy with Aaron Jones on your team. And the last one, both Dalton and I had to wear this one last year. Allen Robinson, very, very poor call by both of us. Yeah, that one just didn't work out. We'll see what he has left in Pittsburgh. But yeah, A-Rob did not work out. It is what it is. So we'll see how we do this year. That'll be fun. Once Dalton joins the show, we will jump into the props live on YouTube here. And of course, in your podcast feeds. And then we will get to the My Guys as well. But real quick, a couple of news items before we get to that. So first of all, pretty recently today on Wednesday, the 49ers named Sam Darnold their backup quarterback, meaning Trey Lance is now their number 3 quarterback. And the reporting that came out of NFL Network is that the 49ers are going to be working on options with Trey Lance. And, you know, this is just it's a crazy situation because most teams in this situation, you trade up to, was it 3 overall? You trade multiple first-round picks for a guy, and it works out this poorly. Like, this is a fireable offense in almost every situation. They've done such a good job building that roster that Kyle Shanahan can do his Kyle Shanahan thing, where he doesn't want the guy to play outside of the system. He wants a guy that excels in his system, which is why, like, looking back, I understand what they wanted to do. They wanted a guy that could elevate the system, but the coach kind of has to be willing to allow that to happen, to allow that leash. There's got to be some give and take, and I just don't really think there was. Of course, there was bad injury luck too. So I guess we'll see on Trey Lance. The jury is still very much out. Like, if you're in a dynasty league and you want to buy really, really low on Trey Lance because you're still a believer, you can give it a shot. I mean, it's got to be really, really low for me to be interested in buying right now, I think. But there is that option still. Like Atlanta, Tampa Bay, Washington, any of those three would be very interesting Trey Lance destinations. I know they all have like some semblance of a guy they like there right now that they've drafted in recent years, or in Tampa's case, Baker Mayfield, and maybe they just want to suck bad enough that they don't want to risk the Trey Lance thing, and they want Caleb Williams, which is a totally defensible stance in my opinion. But if so, totally good with that on Tampa. But yeah, it'll be interesting to follow the Trey Lance stuff, where he ends up, and if he plays any kind of role in this NFL season. Jackson Smith-Njigba broke a bone in his wrist, got tackled near the goal line the other day after a very nice route turned into him nearly scoring a touchdown, got tackled, fell in an unfortunate way on the wrist. The reporting at this point is he's out 3 to 4 weeks, so I think we can probably rule him out for week 1. And then past that, we just don't know. And I don't know if we're going to get any type of clarity that like I don't think that the Seahawks could really say anything to make me believe he's going to play week 1 at this point, because I just don't trust Pete Carroll when it comes to injuries. He's usually erring on the side of caution when it comes to that. We all remember Zach Charbonnet was like out for a while and then he was back. So it's just if you draft JSN, just do it with the thought that this guy could be out a couple of weeks of the season, not just 1 or 2. Hey, we have company.
Hello.
What's up, man? I am getting through these news notes real quick. John and I went through the props already, but I gave very short answers so I can talk a little more in detail with you. But where we're at right now is Jonathan Taylor seeking a trade. The Colts have given him permission to do so. Not much to say on that other than this is a situation to monitor. Obviously, ahead of your drafts, is he playing on the Dolphins? Is he playing on the Colts? Is he not playing at all? That'll be a story to follow this week, and hopefully you don't have to make a draft decision. Terry McLaurin has a toe injury. Sounds like it's turf toe. Nothing definitive on him, whether he's going to miss time or not. But anybody who follows football knows that these turf toe things, while guys can play through them, they can linger. So I can't blame you if Terry McLaurin becomes a much less viable option at his draft price until we learn more and if there's more positive news. Dalton, any thoughts on Taylor, Terry McLaurin, or I also talked a little bit about the Trey Lance situation before you got here too.
RIP Trey Lance. Don't take any shares of him. I'll drop that one. He was my guy last year. Honorable mention.
Yep, I did just run through my guys as I was stalling, waiting for you from last year, and we had some ups and downs. We had some ups and downs on that list, but yeah, Trey Lance was one of yours last year.
On the JT situation, I feel like this is what the Chargers did to Eckler, which they're like, okay, if you want to get traded, go find a trade partner.
Yeah,
here is the compensation we want, and it's like you're at a job and you want a raise and your boss says, go get that raise somewhere else and we'll give it to you here, knowing you're not worth that much money. And I think that's the outcome Taylor is going to probably be faced with. Terry McLaurin out of all of those is probably the most worrisome because turf toe is something that can linger into the season. It also initially looked like an ankle sprain, which is even scarier. It's what killed Jerry Jeudy for 2 years, and he might be bad. It might have been the ankle sprain. But Jahan Dotson at wide receiver 38 is probably a screaming value after that preseason performance.
Yeah, I'm sure he's going to shoot up draft boards in the next week or so, but yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, probably my thought on the news and notes of the day. Sorry for being late here, folks.
It's fine. No worries. We had Johnny give us his recap of his honeymoon. Learned that Italy was his favorite country he visited. So Italy is the official country of the Half Point per Pod now. We're glad to have you. Open to any advertising deals that the whole country of Italy would like to work out. Also, just wanted to say thank you to all the listeners last week. I think last week may have been our most listened to show if you count YouTube views of the show and podcast listens. So thank you guys for that. Hopefully we have another good one coming up today. Dalton, we will zip through these props. Justin Fields over under 2,850.5. I took the over on that. I could respond to what I'm assuming, going to be on the under of that one, but I'll let you give that argument first.
Yeah, I mean, you're completely right. I'm taking the under. I have a couple of reasons for doing it. Just right out of the gate, last year, out of all qualifying 34 quarterbacks, Justin Fields was second longest in time to throw, only surpassed by Zach Wilson. I do not have strong inclinations to believe that a quarterback is going to fix those tendencies. I don't think that's a wide receiver room issue. You're looking down the field, you see nothing, you get it out of your hands situation. He was outdone last year by Kenny Pickett, who didn't play a full season in passing yards, and Brock Purdy in like 9 games had 1,900 passing yards, which almost got to his 2,200. I'm a strong believer that he's just not a good passer. And I don't think the DJ Moore addition is going to be significant enough to overlap this goal, which, again, I know 2,800 sounds like a small number, but Lamar Jackson has only hit that 3 times in his career. So it is difficult to get to. And then my last point
he
here,
guaranteed 4,000. So I'm not sure what you're talking about.
Yeah, he can guarantee a lot of things. And my last thing is I don't want to buy stock into Matt Eberflus and co. in Chicago because I don't know if they're good coaches yet or not. Last year didn't really give me anything to believe. I understand the situation was horrific, but it's hard for me to want to put money and buy stock into that. So I'd rather just fade them because it's harder to be a good NFL coach than it is to be a bad one.
We'll see how the short passing stuff works. It seems like an emphasis in camp has been, hey, you don't have to take off and run every time. Like, dump it down every now and then. So if he does that at least a little more often, that can help toward this number. He finally has like some decent weapons. We like DJ Moore. Chase Claypool at least helps. He's an upgrade now that he's had a whole year kind of to be in the system and get caught up and hopefully be healthy by the season. And then Darnell Mooney missed a lot of time last year too, so he's back. And the deep ball is like the one thing I'm most confident in Fields as a passer. We've talked about this, but 4th in completed air yards per completion, 11th in completed air yards per attempt, and 11th highest percentage of passing yards came from air yards last season. So, and as a rookie, he was top 4 in all of those in a much smaller sample. So he could throw it down the field. If he could get some yak, which he got in the first preseason game, that would also be very helpful for this total.
3 for 3 for 129 yards. We'll definitely get you some yak.
So I just think this is a low enough number. I'm not saying that's like a crazy, because I get you. Like, it's not like 2,800 is not as low as some people make it out to be. But I also think, I said this to Johnny, that I think he's a better passer than the numbers would kind of indicate. There's like, I don't know. He's got all the tools. He's got more tools as a passer than Jalen Hurts, I think. Now, does he have the other stuff? Not yet, TBD. But yeah, I think I'm on the over here. Dameon Pierce, Dalton, over or under 900.5 rushing yards. Johnny and I were both on the over, and I think I know your answer, but let's see.
Yeah, again, this is the under. Because, I mean, for one, last year this guy had basically an unmitigated workload from weeks 4 onward. He totaled 70% of the RB snaps on this team, which I would probably classify as workhorse. And he hardly hit the over on this number then. I think there's going to be more players factoring into the backfield. Shout out to preseason hero and sleeper of the podcast, Mike Boone, who is I think he's going to make himself a little bit of a name here. I think he might be above Devin Singletary on the depth chart, if we're being honest here. And we've always been a fan of him here at Half Point. But I just don't think that Dameon Pierce has it, and I don't think this offense is going to have it either. And when you put those together, I'm taking the under, especially with the tendency for running backs to get injured he would have to be really efficient in his games to get this. And I don't think this offense lends itself to efficiency. And then just going back to our ranks debate episode a while ago, I mean, he was one of two running backs of 16 to have over the number of touches he had in his rookie season and not even hit a top 20 running back in PPR. And I just think his yards are going to suffer from it as well.
Mm. You know what? You know why I put this one on here? Outside of I knew we would disagree, is so this was on our first show at this exact same number, our first player prop show. Not ever. Our first player prop show of the summer. This exact number, and it hasn't changed. I took the under then. I am flipping to the over in this case.
Did I take the under then?
That would be really funny if you did not. And it'd also be funny if Johnny didn't take the same thing that he. Oh wait, it was our second show. We all took the under then, so both Johnny and I have been swayed. But I watch him play, and I come away thinking like he's not great, but I think he's a pretty good running back. I'm not buying stock in preseason necessarily, but I will say the fact that he took 2 snaps on 3rd and 4 and longer in their first drive the other day, or in his 2 series, and he had 8 of those all last season. It's at least a positive sign that the coaching staff is trusting him a little more in those situations. And so maybe if he may not be the all-around first and second down workhorse, but if he's just on the field in more situations, that gives them more opportunity for rushing yards. Not those are like crazy high rushing situations, but there will be a couple times where they run on 3rd and long, I'm sure, where they're
I'm going to spin zone you on this one.
Okay.
Dameon Pierce played all but 2 snaps with the starting offense. Mm-hmm. And those 2 snaps they didn't play were Mike Boone. That doesn't matter. I don't really care about that. In those, he carried the ball 6 times for 15 yards. I do not know if, 2.3 yards per carry is going to get him to 900.
He averaged 5.35 yards per carry against stacked boxes last year. He was 4th the NFL in broken tackles, in the same neighborhood as like Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, Ramondre Stevenson, Jonathan Taylor, and Najee Harris, kind of the black sheep of that group, but Najee Harris as well in that group. So I think he's a legit good player, and I think he's going to have a nice season in a improved but still not very good offense. All right, next guy, Donovan Peoples-Jones, over under 500.5 receiving yards. I mainly wanted to bring this one up because I wanted to talk about whether we think this is the Amari Cooper, Elijah Moore show at receiver, or if Donovan Peoples-Jones will factor in more than that. I personally, I'm on the side of Elijah Moore is going to be the clear 2, with Peoples-Jones clearly behind. And there's also Cedric Tillman there, who can be a good X receiver. Njoku obviously at tight end too. Yeah.
I mean, I will say Austin Watkins and Anthony Schwartz, who are 2 of their perennial like wide receivers that are going to make this roster, are very much so competing. And Austin Watkins looks to be like he might be a better deep threat than Anthony Schwartz, who pushed DPJ for a roster spot last year.
So I'm on the under. I am team funnel the targets to the top 2 guys, and maybe Cedric Tillman can become interesting. I think Donovan Peoples-Jones is kind of just a guy in a great athlete's body. Johnny took the over. Can't hate him for it because it's a low number, 500.5. Dalton, what are you on here?
I'm taking the under for a couple of reasons. One, and I'm not a guy that's going to buy huge stock into preseason camp reports, but all of the camp reports from the beat writers for Cleveland have been that Deshaun Watson has been unmitigatedly terrible. And I mean, the highlight, I saw one camp reporter tweet out, and he said Deshaun Watson's had his best day so far. He went 10 for 15 and 3 touchdowns. I mean, in 7-on-7s, that's not really like something to write home about. And when you carry that over from last year's preseason performance and then last year's in-season performance, I have serious questions if we're getting the same Deshaun Watson we're expecting to see that we saw in Houston. So I'm already down on all the pass catchers for that reason. And then, I mean, Donovan Peoples-Jones has had 3 years now to earn himself like a significant target share in an offense bereft of playmakers outside of Amari Cooper, and he just hasn't done it. So I wouldn't be surprised if Austin Watkins and Cedric Tillman beat him out for that wide receiver 3 spot. Both guys are X receivers. DPJ can only be an X receiver. He probably makes this roster, in my opinion, because he's a good kick returner. and that's really where his specialty for the Browns lie.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's zip through this one a little bit here. Justin Herbert, over under 4,450.5. I took the over. I think Herbert is probably one of the 3 best bets in my mind to lead the league in passing yards. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm taking the over. Kellen Moore train arrived in Los Angeles. I'm a little concerned. I'm too low on some of the pass catchers in Los Angeles as well, just because of how good they could be.
Yeah. Okay. The last guy, sadly, I already had to say his name because Johnny and I did this, and so Johnny had to give his prop. But the last guy, Dalton, is a my guy for you. So let's get straight into the my guys with your first one.
Yeah, my first guy. No surprise to anybody who will listen to the ranking show. The only retread I'm throwing up here, it's Darren Waller. I don't think, looking at ADP, there's anybody at a better bet at tight end to be the overall tight end 1 that's not Travis Kelce that's going this low. So the guy's going above Darren Waller right now, who he has skyrocketed up underdog ADP recently. If you haven't noticed, he went from tight end 7 to tight end 4. When I originally did this write up, he was still a tight end 7. He's now tight end 4. Still, the guy's going above him. One, TJ Hawkinson. I think Darren Waller is more talented than TJ Hawkinson. I don't think we disagree on the talent in Darren Waller. I think we disagree on the availability of Darren Waller.
Well, and I'm just this is really, people know my rebuttal to this and why I took the under. I didn't really give the reason on this show, but the Ranks Debate show is just he's played 20 games in the last 2 years. He's going into his age 31 season. Will that same guy come back this year? Hopefully so, but I think the jury is still out. Now, it sounds like based on Giants camp, he's playing like a different sport than everybody else there. So who knows?
Well, and talked about this on the Ranks Debate episode. The number of players to draw 25% target share in the Giants offense last year were pretty bad players. And I am confident in saying Darren Waller is a better receiver than any receiver on the Giants roster. That one's one I'm willing to go with. We saw it in his one preseason game. He played with the starters where he had 50% of the team's targets when he was on the field. I mean, this guy is going to be a target machine. I'm a big believer. Brian Dabble last year made guys like Isaiah Hodgins and Darius Slayton these late round targets, all because he made them look productive and he orchestrated a productive offense. My opinion, Mark Andrews is going to see a significant decline in target share. I think Darren Waller should be above him. TJ Hawkinson's another guy I'm just not buying into. But just to hit like with some of the stats on how good Waller is when he's healthy, he runs 32 routes per game and gets 7.6 targets per game. So he's averaging an insane target share on routes run, and he averages 5 receptions and 62.5 yards per game. This puts him in the top 4 of all tight ends. The only downfall was with the Raiders. He was unable to really turn a lot of these targets into touchdowns. I think it's a bigger indictment to the Raiders offense. He's the best red zone weapon other than Saquon Barkley on this team, and maybe a Daniel Jones QB run.
I was going to say maybe a Daniel Jones QB run, yep.
But the last reason he's a my guy is kind of throwing some game theory into drafting your players. I am staunchly against mid-round tight ends, and this is a mid-round tight end pick.
Yep.
Because 2 things are going on here. One, if you draft Darren Waller and he plays 17 games, I'm pretty confident saying he'll be a top 4 tight end regardless and might press for top 2 or 1. But if Darren Waller gets injured, you're not losing a lot of replacement value, because you can get another guy in the later rounds who's going to do just as good for you. So if you draft Darren Waller in the 8th round and then you bring it back in the 15th round with Irv Smith, I think you're going to end up with a pretty good roster.
You might end up with 2 guys who are out by week 3.
Maybe not Irv Smith. Let me change it. Maybe not Irv Smith. Like, let's do like a Jake Ferguson or Gerald Everett or Juwan Johnson late in these drafts.
Tyler Higbee.
Yeah, any of those guys. Then I think you have a pretty confident roster build where every week he's healthy. You start Darren Waller and you know he can score you 20 points a game. And if he is hurt, you have a guy whose replacement value is going to be detrimental to your roster. I think drafting some of these other mid-round tight ends is absolutely terrible for your team, because even their upside cases is like tight end 7.
See, like we should have had this ranks debate at the time, or just this straight up debate. Probably don't have time to do it now because we need to get to the rest of our guys. But, like, I would rather take Kyle Pitts in that similar neighborhood, but I'm not like I have Waller at tight end 8, like right there with Pat Freiermuth. I could easily be talking swapping those 2 guys. Like it's pretty close for me. on those two. As long as you're taking them as like your tight end 7, tight end 8, that's fine. It's when you get up to that tight end 4, like in underdog, if that price starts seeping into home leagues, then I will feel a lot less good about it because I think the risk is baked in at tight end 7 or 8. I don't think the risk is baked in like it should be at that higher rank. And I'm sure you'd even agree with that to some extent, although I know you have him ranked higher than tight end 7.
Yeah, and right now on underdog, he's going 60th overall, which puts him in the same range as players like Deontay Johnson, huge fan of.
Mm-hmm.
Alexander Madison, I'd take over him. George Kittle, I would take over him. Dameon Pierce, I would take Waller over Kittle and Pierce. Trevor Lawrence, George Pickens, those are all guys I would still take over.
Pickens is the first one that you said that I would take Waller over.
But him becoming, and again, since last I looked at ADP, this has been a jump over the last 4 days. Him being all the way up in the 5th round makes him much richer. And I think it's part because his preseason performance probably leads a lot of people to believe what I'm saying, that if he does play, he's going to be a target machine. It definitely pick 60 is getting a little rich for me, but I still like if you put him and Mark Andrews in a room together at pick 30 and you told me to pick, I might take Darren Waller no matter what.
Man, I don't know about that, but I think we all know my thoughts. And now your
LVP last year, Mark Andrews.
Darren
Waller couldn't lose you leagues because you couldn't start him because he was injured. All right.
At least he does that for you. He just goes away instead of being bad on the field, I guess.
Hey, there is something to be said about that.
All right. My first one, I wanted to get a quarterback on this list because I had a hunch that Darren Waller might be on yours. I'm going Trevor Lawrence. Now, on its face, this is the QB8 in ADP and my QB8 in drafts. So I'm not like telling you go take him way ahead of his ADP. But what I am saying is that I really like if I don't take one of those top 3 guys, I really like drafting Trevor Lawrence at this spot. He's the last guy. We talked about this a little bit, Dalton. Like there's a top 8, and you disagree with Fields, so maybe for you it's different. But for me, there's a top 8, and once you get past the 8th quarterback, there's a big drop off in certainty and an upside. And I like taking the cheapest of that group in Lawrence. So there's that aspect of it. And then like you just look back at last year, he and Doug Peterson created one of the top 5 to 10 passing offenses in the NFL with Christian Kirk, who we like, but is not a number 1 receiver. Evan Ingram, who had a nice year and was healthy, and so he was actually pretty decent, but is not a number 2 option in the passing game in an ideal passing offense. And Zay Jones, who should not be your number 3 option. Like all of these guys were playing up a rung last year. Now, if Calvin Ridley is what we're hoping for and what we're ranking him to be and what a lot of people are ranking him to be, all those guys get bumped back down. Trevor Lawrence's life gets made a lot easier. And I mean, frankly, we talk a lot about, what's DJ Moore going to do for Justin Fields. And that I think is valid to some extent. We've seen it with other guys the last couple of years. What if Calvin Ridley helps Trevor Lawrence take a major step forward? And a major step forward for Trevor Lawrence, like, I think we all have it set, like myself included. I have Lawrence 8 and Burrow 4, but I think everybody just kind of has it set in their minds that Burrow is the better player, real life and fantasy, than Trevor Lawrence. I think by the end of this season, if the highest end outcome or close to it comes true for the Jags and for Trevor Lawrence, I think he's going to be right there with Burrow in fantasy and with Burrow in real life, which is to say he's going to be right there in the QB2 conversation in real life football behind Mahomes, I think, if things go well this season. Like, we forget, this is a guy who was a generational prospect. It was him. It was Andrew Luck. And his first year in the NFL was just one of the most not real years you could ever imagine with Urban Meyer. He gets a real coach with a real system and competent pass catchers around him last year. And the guy was good. And the last half of last year, especially, he was really good. And I know like it didn't necessarily turn into elite fantasy production. I think so weeks 9 to 16 last year, he was the QB6 in points and points per game, but that's still above QB8. And that's still, again, without Calvin Ridley being there and potentially boosting this offense in a real way. So I like taking him where he's at. And I'm not even advocating for higher, but I just think there's a lot of upside that just isn't priced into his rank because there's other guys ahead of him who I also like a lot. And I just like going with the cheapest guy there.
So off the gate, don't disagree with you. I really like Trevor Lawrence. This is something I haven't got to talk about this offseason just because we haven't really had a good opening for it. But something I've wanted to bring up is how wild the current ADPs at quarterbacks are compared to previous years. Like 4 or 5 years ago, late round quarterback was the methodology. You take a guy late, you stack your skill position players because these pocket passing guys really don't vary in scoring even when they vary in skill. This year, this is from Ian Hartitz on Twitter. We have 6 QBs with an ADP inside the top 50 overall. In 2022, that was 4. 2021, that was 3. 2020 and 2019, it was 2. And I really like Trevor Lawrence. Taking him where his ADP is at, which on Underdog right now is 63.8, is just really difficult for me with the guys going around him. But I do think if you're going QB early or like mid-round, he is the only viable pick. If you're discounting Justin Herbert's inside the top 50. So I'm discounting him as a mid-round pick at this point. The other mid-round picks are Deshaun Watson, Tua Tagovailoa, Anthony Richardson, who's going in the top 100 now, which is expensive, Dak Prescott, and then Daniel Jones. I think among those guys, if you're going mid-round at all, I would do it. My only thing is I really think QB play is getting elevated because the top ones are winning leagues, but some of these mid-round guys don't have that league-winning potential. Now, Trevor Lawrence starts using his legs more and gets on the ground more, or
he does use his legs a fair amount. Like he's good for about 300 rushing yards, and he's had 2 rushing touchdowns and 5 rushing touchdowns in his 2 years. So you could he get. It's not nothing. It's not what it could be, I don't think, but it's like a Mahomes level of rushing addition to his passing.
But then to expect him to be the QB1 would be a Mahomes level.
Yeah, and I'm not saying.
No, I'm not saying you're saying that either. I'm just saying I probably would rather take a late round dart throw on somebody who could be a top 12 guy like Stafford, or I don't know about Anthony Richardson anymore. Pick 100, but Daniel Jones later. Those are guys, but I do like Trevor Lawrence. I think he's a good guy. I don't think he's a bad pick. It's just QB is altogether getting elevated in drafts right now, and I don't know how to feel about that.
Yeah. Okay, give me your second guy. I'm going to go look at Fantasy Pros to see what the non-sharps are doing with Trevor Lawrence's overall ADP.
Oh, I can tell you right now, I have that open. Trevor Lawrence's I don't have the actual pick. He's QB8. I know that much.
Yeah, I'll pull up the full ADP. You give your second guy here.
So the next 3 my guys this year are my old guys, unfortunately. Going into them, I think this guy's made an appearance every year we've done the podcast, and I will continue to let him make appearances until he proves me wrong. But it's Tyler Lockett. I do not understand what people are asking me to do with Tyler Lockett. He is currently priced at the wide receiver 32. We're going to play a fun game. 2018, his ADP was wide receiver 54. His PPR finish was wide receiver 16. 2019 ADP, he was wide receiver 19. He finished the wide receiver 13. 2020, wide receiver 21, finished wide receiver 8. 2021, wide receiver 19, finished wide receiver 16. This year, all the way at wide receiver 32, last year, wide receiver 38. He finished at wide receiver 13. There has not been a year in 5 years that he's underperformed ADP. It is the most consistent thing next to Mike Evans getting 1,000 yards every year in the football space. And he's going not even as a wide receiver 3. When he's at 1,000 yards for 4 straight years, his passing offense is likely going to take a step forward and run less out of 12 personnel and more out of 11 personnel. And the only discount I can find for him is they added JSN. But the Jackson Smith-Njigba draft pick is probably good for Tyler Lockett. On targets per routes last year, he averaged 0.4 targets per route run from the slot and 0.7 targets per route run from outside. he's been a better outside receiver than he has been a slot receiver. And if your only argument is that he slows down in the second half of the season, that's been a problem with all of Seattle, but you're still getting a guy who puts up some weeks 30 points, and you're getting him all the way in the 70s in drafts. Other than that, I can see the argument that he's getting older, but last season, just like with other elite players like Travis Kelce, there were no signs of drop-off. From reception perception, he had the 4th highest success rate versus man last year in the NFL and the 8th highest success rate versus zone. And then ESPN ranked him as the 3rd most open receiver out of any player of last season, out of 538 total wide receivers ranked. And then he was 20th in yards per route run. So I just can't find an argument that leads me credence to not draft Tyler Lockett where he's going. And he should probably be drafted all the way within the top 24 of wide receivers.
Yeah, I think we both have him ranked that way. To play devil's advocate, because I completely agree with you on everything with Lockett. I am right there in lockstep with you on Lockett. Is JSN currently hurt, currently probably set to miss week 1. Maybe that ADP creeps up a little bit. I'm still taking it, but it's going to probably go up to where you're actually going to have to pay a more reasonable price for Lockett than what you are right now, I think. And also, before I forget, Trevor Lawrence actually going higher in non-sharp drafts right now, which I guess shouldn't be too shocking. 53 overall. Still on it. Still digging it.
Still digging it.
And then number 2 with Lockett is you do worry, not that there's been any drop-off, but there is a small part of me that just wonders, because I like JSN. I like him a lot as a prospect. I think he's really good. And I don't think he's going to only take away from Lockett. I think it's going to be from both DK and Lockett. But, like, what does December and late November look like for Tyler Lockett if JSN starts really hitting his stride? So that would be the concern. But at the price, and even if the price goes up a little bit, I'm still very much on board here.
Well, and I always do my best to give myself a little argument on why I could be wrong. But last year, Lockett was the best wide receiver in Seattle. He had more points than DK Metcalf if you're just going on that alone. But success, those reception perception success rates, he was better than DK in both of them. And I do not understand. Usually the market's really sharp. I don't understand DK not taking a hit. His ADP last year and this year are identical. But Tyler Lockett's ADP dropped 12 spots on wide receiver.
Yeah, I think it's just the market seeing JSN as a 1-for-1 replacement.
Yeah,
and for that to be sooner rather than later.
And on Underdog, JSN is going above Tyler Lockett.
Yeah,
which and some of the other guys going above him, like Christian Kirk's going above him. I think he should go above Christian Kirk. DeAndre Hopkins is going above him. I would take him over Hopkins.
Yeah.
Christian Watson, DJ Moore, Jerry Jeudy, Deebo Samuel, all guys I would take Tyler Lockett above. It's just every year Tyler Lockett is freer than he should be, and I'll just keep banging the drum until I'm wrong.
Yep, with you there. Okay, my second one, a guy that we have talked about plenty. Won't get into it too much more today, but I would be remiss if I didn't bring up Sky Moore, because he is probably, out of all of these guys, he's the guy that I'm leaving every draft with because he's the easiest. Like, he's wide receiver 50 ADP. I can just take him wide receiver 42, like in the ADP order, and I get him every time. I have Sky Moore on, I think, every team I've drafted this year. And, Tony is still the highest Chiefs receiver being drafted right now. And I get that, especially if he is going to be back week 1, but I far prefer the gamble on Sky Moore right now. Like, Sky Moore is not going to win you your league. Tony could. So again, I get the gamble, but I do think Sky Moore has the upside to give you a week-to-week starters production at a bench wide receiver price. And that could be incredibly valuable. That can allow you, if you know you have that kind of in your back pocket in a draft, you know that you're going to reach for Sky Moore and get him a little early, but what you still think is a value, you can maybe take a Darren Waller, a Trevor Lawrence, or, a Patrick Mahomes, a Josh Allen, a Jalen Hurts earlier.
Jameson Williams, because you have a guy who will replace Jameson Williams if he's just not good.
Yeah, so you can feel more comfortable in taking a quarterback earlier, a tight end earlier, not both probably, but one of them. Or like you said, you take a risk on Jameson Williams because you do feel like Sky Moore can can kind of unlock your team a little bit by being better in the ADP. So he himself is not going to win your league, but I think the draft strategies that he can allow you to do are league-winning type of draft strategies, and that's why I like drafting Sky so much, and especially like rounds 3 through 5. It's just a bloodbath right now for running back and receiver. So I like scooping up one I can trust much later than that. And then like on Sky Moore himself, we've talked about this a lot, but the Chiefs gave him a chance to play all 3 wide receiver spots last year. You know, he was outside, he was inside, he was doing, flanker, he was lineup all over the place. And there were some growing pains, and there were some wrong routes run. There were some routes that weren't run quite to perfection and resulted in an interception or whatever the case may be. But I just think I saw enough from him as a route runner, as a separator. Reception perception, you mentioned earlier, it likes him as a separator quite a bit. Like, he's legitimately refined route runner, and I think he's going to step right into that Juju Smith-Schuster slot role and excel. And I think we just have a tendency to leave a guy for dead if they didn't come in and show us something stats-wise right away as a rookie. And I just want to remind people, they had MVS, they had Juju in the exact role that Sky was going to be playing last year. And this is a team that was Super Bowl contenders, ended up winning the Super Bowl. Like, this was not an easy spot for him to come in and break the lineup and contribute right away. I think if he goes, even though we like the situation more now, I think if he goes somewhere worse and has 600 yards last season, he's going 15 spots higher than he is right now.
Yeah, I agree with you. Right now, Underdog is ADP is at wide receiver 44. He did jump Kadarius Toney on that, but it's still wild. They're 5 spots apart, considering Toney might not play till week 6, depending on what reports you're reading. I was a big Sky Moore fan coming out of college. You go watch his tape at Western Michigan. It's exciting. He's fun. He's fast with the ball in his hands. Everybody who's played for the Chiefs and then left has said that Andy Reid's playbook is incredibly difficult to learn. A great example of that was last year against the Colts game. Mahomes, 1 interception. Sky Moore was supposed to cut up. He cut in. Mahomes threw an interception because of it.
It was the same story in the 49ers game, too. There was one like that.
And those mistakes did cost Sky Moore his spot on the field. But like you said, he was very copy and paste. They wanted him and Juju to do the same thing. And Juju is a 5-year NFL pro who did a better job at that. But you're getting a guy who's going into a spot where a guy who's injured in Juju finished as the wide receiver 28 last year. Like, that's highly profitable. It's easy to get those points. And the Chiefs don't have a single wide receiver in the top 100 picks, which is insane because they have a quarterback going 20
Patrick
overall.
Mahomes is the quarterback,
and
Andy Reid is the offensive coordinator. Like, I think we just all need to get together and decide we're taking a shot on one of these guys at wide receiver 38.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, we know, MVS has had 5 seasons in the NFL, and he's almost identical every year. We know exactly what MVS is. He does his job well. That's fine. Justin Watson is around. He's doing his thing, but he's not a fantasy player. And then you have Kadarius Toney, who great player.
If he's on the field, the wild card is Justin Ross, because I have been impressed with what he's shown. But I still think no matter how this room shakes out, I think Sky is going to have a nice role at a nice price. All right, I'll let you give your third. I have to run downstairs for 30 seconds. I will be back.
Oh, okay. Well, jumping into my third, we're just going back to the drawing board with another guy I had last year. It's Deontay Johnson. Just like the Tyler Lockett situation, I don't fully understand what the draft cost is for Deontay Johnson versus what we saw last year. Right now on Underdog, Deontay Johnson is fighting with his backfield mate in George Pickens to be wide receiver 34. Deontay Johnson is wide receiver 35. George Pickens is wide receiver 34. It doesn't make sense to me for a couple of reasons. First of all, last year, Deontay Johnson didn't score a single touchdown, but of all players to have 147 targets and to not score a touchdown, the next closest was all the way down at 102. So there's a big difference. No player's ever had the season Deontay Johnson does, which is touchdownless. And then if you look at his expected fantasy points per game from fantasy data, his wide receiver outcome in a putrid Pittsburgh offense that did half the season with Mitch Trubisky and the second half with rookie Kenny Pickett was to be wide receiver 19. he would already outperform his ADP by 16 spots doing that. Despite that, his 2022 campaign, when you don't look at just counting stats, is still a very successful campaign. His first read target share was 4th in the NFL. The only players that were ahead of him were Stephon Diggs, Tyler Lockett, another my guy, and T. Higgins on first reads. Kenny Pickett is going to continue to feed him the ball. All signs point to Kenny Pickett having a next year, a more successful campaign. Rookies usually take a step forward. And then, I mean, it's really hard to not go back in Deontay Johnson's history and see how successful he can be. 2 years ago, he was a wide receiver 8 in PPR points with 107 catches, 1,161 yards, and 8 touchdowns. And you're drafting this guy all the way at wide receiver 35. Like, it is absurd that Deontay Johnson is going this late, because Deontay Johnson, if he played with Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen, would be a top 6 pick in every fantasy draft, because he is so incredibly talented at football. He's one of the best route runners in football. And I can't make sense of the talent discrepancy with other guys around him. Some of the other players going around Deontay Johnson, again, Chris Kirk, Jahan Dotson, Gabe Davis, like Jordan Addison, Michael Pittman. I mean, those guys, good receivers. Deontay Johnson is a whole caliber above him. Reception perception has him ranked as the second best man and zone beater last season. And all of that to say is you're getting a guy that got 150 targets in an offense in the 8th round of fantasy drafts, and he's going to do the same thing again. There's no one that's going to take those targets away from him. All signs point to Kenny Pickett being better. And worst case scenario, you're drafting him as your wide receiver 4, and he finishes as your wide receiver 4. Like,
yeah. I mean, I think as long as he's healthy, I think we saw the floor last season because he did not score any touchdowns, and that's basically still around where he's being drafted right now. I don't know what all you said in that first little bit when I was gone, but did you give this stat that he had the record for most targets without a touchdown at 147? That is 38 more than second place. That is double.
I did have this.
That is double the next closest guy last season, which was Saquon, who was like in the 70s target range with no receiving touchdowns. And that's a running back, not a wide receiver.
And this isn't one of those fun stats that just made up. This is going all the way back to 1992. Like, this is recording it for 30 years of data, and Deontay Johnson is that far above. And his league mate and wide receiver mate, George Pickens, had 98 targets and 7 touchdowns. Like, there's going to be discrepancies here, and they're probably going to default towards Deontay and be at the loss of George Pickens.
Well, the actual guy that had the record before, had the record for most receptions, not targets, but most receptions without a touchdown before Deontay set that last year was Raymond Berry in 1965. That's what kind of rare company Deontay is. And which, by the way, Raymond Berry led the NFL in receiving touchdowns the previous 2 years before that. So even in the 1960s, touchdowns, very hard to predict.
If you go back and listen to our 1962 podcast, Raymond Berry wasn't my guy. All right, who do you have next?
All right. Hold that T. Higgins stat for the next one here. But
the
this
first
one,
read, he was second in the NFL, by the way.
Did not know that. Did not have that in my notes. You know what? I'll just go right to T. Higgins, even though T. Higgins is my number one, my guy. To be clear, I have one more after him, but he is my number one, my guy. But the stat flows in so well. We'll just go with it. The ADP for him is wide receiver 14 on Fantasy Pros. I think it's pretty similar. I think it may even be the exact same last I saw on Underdog. I have him at 10, so not a great deal higher, but still higher. And we've talked about this a lot. If you're a handful of spots higher that early in the draft, it is a somewhat significant difference. And the biggest knock I always see against T. Higgins is he just doesn't have enough upside. Like, he just doesn't have enough upside to be taken as a wide receiver 1. I'm not saying I see him on a lot of bust lists, but he is on more of them than about anybody else in his draft range. I think, like any other receiver of his caliber, he's the one I see the most, and it really is that. But I really just think this guy is a wide receiver 1 hiding in plain sight, and it's just been injuries and, basically just injuries. And, what happened in the Bills game happened last year. Like, he's not only had injuries, he's had games where he has been injured very early on. He had a game last year where he was a straight up decoy. He was active, played like 7% of the snaps, and then had one target. He had another game, I think, last year where he played 1% of his team snaps. I think got hurt that quickly. So even if you look at like his points per game and just look at the whole season, that doesn't even tell the true story of what this guy has been the last couple of years. But I'll get to that. I think there is still upside with T. Higgins, even if Jamar Chase is there, and it's for one reason. Look at one spot in the box score. He has 13 touchdown receptions in 30 games with Joe Burrow as his quarterback, with Jamar Chase as the wide receiver. Not all of the Chase, but since Chase has gotten there, I should say. And this is a guy who's 6'4", can high point the ball extremely well. It's one of his best attributes. It's why he's so good over the middle. I mean, we remember the catch he had against the Chiefs in the playoffs for the touchdown. Like, that was one of the better catches of the entire postseason on any player. So, like, there is nothing about T. Higgins that says this guy is a 7 and 6 touchdown scorer, even if he does play 13, 14 games. So even if you just give him, even if this guy gets to double-digit touchdowns, which he's going to have a season like that eventually, he's going to outperform this ADP. So that's number one and the most basic analysis as far as that goes. And then number two, like, as long as Burrow's calf is fine, this is a top 5 passing offense, and there's just no reason that a guy who has been, like you said, number 2 in the NFL in first read targets the last year. There's no reason that guy can't be a top 10 fantasy receiver. Despite the size, he's a very good separator, very good route runner. And then let's take a look back at some of those game logs last year and some of the points per game stuff. So last season, he finished as the wide receiver 17 cumulatively. But obviously, the game log says 16, but he left one game early with a concussion, played about a fourth of the snaps, was a decoy in week 5, played 16% of the snaps, no targets, and then he played one snap in week 4, 0 targets, and then we all know what happened against Buffalo, but that still counts against him in the points per game when you look at it. If you just take the 12 full games he played last season, he's, wide receiver 14. He's like moving on up a little bit. And then, it's still, so wide receiver 14, if you look at all of them, if you take those 4 out, I read this wrong. He is 15.1 points per game, wide receiver 7 in points per game last season, one spot behind Jamar Chase. You do the same exercise in 2021 because it was he missed a couple games. He had another one where he left early. He was a wide receiver 22, but points per game, he's wide receiver 11. So this is a guy who has produced when he's been on the field and played full games as a wide receiver 1, and people just don't want to talk themselves into it when I think he has just as high upside and just probably even a safer floor than Chris Olave, then Jalen Waddle, then Devontae Smith, all those guys who are going right around but slightly ahead of him.
Yeah. One fun stat I have, and this one's floated around Twitter multiple times. If you take their entire career together between T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, and you do a 16-game span for both of them, Jamar Chase finishes as the wide receiver 4 overall last year, and T. Higgins finishes as the wide receiver 5. Mm-hmm. And the difference in targets is 8 targets total. Obviously, first of all, this isn't like Jamar Chase hate. I think it's T. Higgins is underappreciated. 3 years, 900 yards is as low as that's his rookie season where he played without Joe Burrow for most of the season. Joe Burrow has back-to-back 4,500 passing yard seasons. No one expects this offense to take a step back. I think this offense is probably going to get more creative. They had to the second half of last season. The start of last year, obviously, there was the 4-pick game, the multiple sack game against the Steelers. By week 5, if anybody remembers, it seems like the offense in Cincinnati figured it out, and they ran a lot more RPOs. They were a much better team altogether when it came together offensively. And everybody thinks that T. Higgins is being overdrafted because he did well when Jamar Chase was gone. It's not the case. You could have 2 good wide receivers on a team.
Well, I actually think I don't have the stat, but I remember this as it was happening. I think last year he was basically about the same points per game with and without Jamar Chase. So I think it's a little bit of a misnomer for that people think, oh, well, he needs Jamar Chase to get hurt to be a top 10 receiver. It's like, no, he's just kind of the same thing with and without Jamar Chase. There's not a ton more upside without Chase, and there's not a ton more downside with Chase. It's about the same.
Yeah, and what I really don't understand is obviously Devonta Smith was a bust last year for me, or for this year for me.
Yeah.
I don't understand taking Devonta Smith over T. Higgins.
Yeah,
That
me
one doesn't
neither.
track for me. Jalen Waddle is another guy that goes above him that I'm still questionable on.
Yeah, and it's like it's the same arguments that you would make against Higgins you can make for those guys, but
Yep.
they don't have Joe Burrow as their quarterback
Exactly.
and in this passing offense. And like I think maybe people just think those guys are better than T. Higgins. I think just as a player, T is under. I think he's every bit as good as both of those guys.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that I think T. Higgins is better than both those guys. He's proven to be better, and he is way more likely to be able to lead his team if the starter goes down than those two. We saw Devonta Smith struggle his rookie year doing that, and Jalen Waddle simply is just not built to be the wide receiver one on that offense. And you're tying your fantasy production to a wide receiver two with Tua Tagovailoa.
Yep. Or Skylar Thompson. Okay, yeah. Dalton, you're number one, my guy.
This comes as no surprise to anybody who listened to this podcast for multiple years in a row. Yet again, it's James Conner. All of my guys just feel like screaming values, which probably means none of them are going to work out.
You are running a high risk of all of your guys being like completely washed up in week 8.
Yeah, but if they're injured, I'm not wrong. Just like some fun facts for James Conner. He's going as a wide receiver 26 right now, which means people aren't even drafting him as an RB2, which is absurd because he's the RB1 on an NFL team by like a mile. And I'm not a guy who just looks at rosters and does a one-to-one comparison and says, well, clearly he's going to get all the runs. But he did get all the work last year. He had a 70% snap share. From week 11 onward, he was RB4 in fantasy. So already it's astounding to me that people aren't taking him higher based off one, workload, and two, he's the only guy who was successful for a lot of fantasy teams to end the year. And usually there's some recency bias there. The next argument is, well, he's just a runner. Like he only runs with the ball. He's not a guy that's going to catch the ball. Well, that's also wrong. He ran the 4th most routes last year of any running back. He was only beaten by CMC, Saquon Barkley. I mean, this is absurd, the amount of workload this guy was getting. Are we concerned about him getting injured? Yes. I'm concerned about every running back I draft getting injured. But
but James Conner has done what you would project for every running back, which is to miss a couple games. I don't think he's played more than 14 games, but one time. So he does just get hurt every year. It's just a fact.
I don't disagree with you. We'll play a fun game. Guys above him. James Cook, never in his career has he handled more than 150 touches in a season. This goes back to college. Next, Javonte Williams. He's already hurt. Okay. Up next, Cam Akers. Cam Akers' argument for fantasy relevance is the exact same argument as James Conner, except he might be behind a worse offensive line and might have a better offensive-minded coach. Next on the list, Miles Sanders. Wow, he's hurt as well. Up next, J.K. Dobbins. All the love to J.K. Dobbins.
J.K.'s looking great. I don't know what you're talking about.
In his career had more than 50% of the running back snaps. So we're gonna keep going up this list because it keeps getting bad. Alexander Madison, hate. Kenneth Walker, he hasn't practiced. Breece Hall, another problem. I mean, you have to go all the way up to the RB 13 and 14 before it gets legitimate that these guys have an argument against the workload James Conner is having. But the next argument, because I went and read James Conner's bust articles to try to find out what's going on here, it's that he's bad because Kyler Murray's not going to be there.
You do have to agree that this might not be Colt McCoy. This could be Clayton Tune. It could be a combination of both, and it might not work out quite like it did the end last season.
I don't care who it is because there's one wide receiver on that roster over 6 feet tall. The rest of them are 5'6". James Conner is going to get passing work because they need him in the pass game. Even if James Conner plays 60% of his team's snaps, he's going to outperform his ADP. He's going to be the most tried and true every down starter. And he's legitimately a good pass catching back. And I think Arizona is going to be in a lot of down 30 in the third quarter situations. Last year, his targets per route run from week 10.
To play devil's advocate, sorry. Wouldn't there be a chance he's just not in the game if they're down by that much in the third, or down by a lot in the third quarter?
Who are we going to play?
Keontae Ingram.
Keontae Ingram.
It seems like Keontae Ingram has kind of secured that RB2 spot. We've both been fans in the past. This coaching staff has no tie to either of these guys. May as well see what the young guy has while you're tanking.
You're absolutely right. But James Conner, also they have no ties to him. His contract's dead at the end of this year. He's free money. You're playing with house money, and if you think the guy gives you a little get up, you may as well run him out there. I'm very confident with the bevy of picks Arizona has, they will be drafting a running back next year. They don't care about who's on roster.
All right, sorry. Give your yards per route run stat.
From week 10 onward, from the Kyler Murray injury, he was third in targets per route run among running backs. The only player above him was DeAndre Swift and Christian McCaffrey. Like, they're legitimately, he's a good pass catcher, and then he's also a good runner. And I think this team is going to need to utilize him because he's probably the second best option they have on offense to do anything for them, behind Marquise Brown. I mean, maybe he falls behind Michael Wilson, but even then, this guy I think he's a legitimate threat to destroy ADP. And the first 10 weeks of your fantasy run, he could very well be within the top 10 of running backs if Arizona has any success running the ball on the ground.
Which they may not. But no, I think I have Connor ahead of you. Said RB26 was ADP.
Yes.
So I think I'm even a handful of spots. Like where do you have Connor ranked right now?
I have him at RB16.
Okay, so I have him at 19, so you're a couple spots higher, but I am mostly with you, but I can just poke holes in it in a way that I don't think you're willing to. So I may be a tad bit lower. You would never guess that Dalton traded James Conner to me in our Dynasty League. For anybody who is
tanking,
who is not listening, maybe you should trade for him back. Give me more than what I gave you for him. We can
a
get
third and Tyrion Davis Price.
You got Chase Claypool.
I forgot because it's already off the roster. No, it's just my argument isn't against him. It's that there are running backs going around him with the same problems, and I think he's done better in a bad situation than some of those other guys, namely Rachaad White.
Yeah, no, I mean, you don't have to talk to me about Rachaad White. I gave that case last week.
David Montgomery's going in front of him, which I like. Him and Miles Sanders are like white bread to me. There's no fun in them. And then I still think Kenneth Walker's a bust. I would draft James Conner in the 4th round before I drafted Kenneth Walker in the 4th round.
Yeah, fair enough. I would still take Kenneth Walker, but it's a debate. I literally have them back to back right now, so I would be probably faced with that choice. And
James Conner's healthy.
That is true.
He beat cancer. He's going to be ADP.
Tough to argue with that line of thinking. Okay. My guy, and real quick, I do want to thank people who have hung with us. We're at an hour 13, about the same length as last week, I guess. But I will have Johnny put a timestamp if you want to skip the Evan filibustering. Like if you're catching this on YouTube and go back and listen, you can skip that part because that's just news and looking back at last year's My Guys. But my guy is actually a guy that I named when I was looking back at my Guys from last year, his second year in a row on my list, and that is Khalil Herbert. RB35 and ADP. He's my RB31, and frankly, I was looking at my rankings, and I really want to move him up like 3 more spots, get him like RB28, something like that. I get that on paper, there are a lot of obstacles for Herbert this season. He's got Rashawn Johnson, who they brought in. Deontay Foreman, they bring in free agency. Justin Fields may have the most rushing yards on the team this season like he did last season. And then you just have the fact that maybe Rashawn Johnson is a better scheme fit than Khalil Herbert for certain things. But I guess what I'm betting on is Herbert is a good enough player and by far the most talented running back on this team that he's going to be the lead guy in this backfield. He may not be a 65% guy, but he doesn't have to be to live up to RB35 or even RB31, even RB28, where I have him ranked. Like, I think if all things were equal and he was just like in a whatever you call a league average position for a fantasy running back, I think he'd be like RB15, RB16. Like, I think he's one of the 15 to 20 most talented guys in the NFL at the position. I love the way he plays. He's so explosive. He's a tackle breaker. He forced 29 missed tackles on 129 carries last season. So basically almost a fourth of his carries, he was breaking a tackle, which is pretty good. He was 4th in rush yards over expected in the NFL last season. And look, he was I had it somewhere, RB 39 last season, so 4 spots below his current ADP, but he had 138 touches. Like, no matter what you think about this backfield, about Fields' rushing, I think we can all agree that Herbert's probably in line for more than that because David Montgomery out-touched him by 100 carries, by 100 touches last year. And I don't think that's going to happen with either of these running backs this season. Like, again, I know they haven't committed to him in the past. Maybe they won't now, but they don't have to commit to him to be the unquestioned workhorse. He has to be the 50 to the 30 to the 20, the 60 to the 30 to the 10, whatever. Like, I just think this guy is a super good player. His ADP is down low enough to where, like, you look at guys around him, and I wish I had the list, or maybe I do still. Looking around him, it's like, DeAndre Swift is going ahead of him. That'd be a real conversation. I know who Dalton's taking in that situation. David Montgomery, James Cook, Dalvin Cook, Rashad White, like those guys, none of those guys are guaranteed to be the lead guy in their backfield, and neither is Herbert. So I just think this is a bet you can make on talent. That talent can overcome the situation, and he can be the RB 25 if things break okay, and if everything breaks perfectly this season, if he does completely win that job, and maybe Fields runs a little less, it's still like run a lot, but maybe a little less. This is a guy that has like top 20 upside, in my opinion, if things break really well. And there's just not other guys in this range. Like, I was looking last night, and this has already flipped a little bit, but as of last night, we were taking both Washington running backs ahead of him. Like, really, both of those guys ahead of Khalil Herbert. Like, I just think this guy is massively underrated. There's a new rookie in town. Everyone's freaked out about that, freaked out about Fields, and I'm just buying the dip on the talent because it's not a heavy price to pay.
Yeah, I like Khalil Herbert, obviously. I think you and me both wanted him as my guy last year, and we just decided to split the difference. I will give the argument against him here. First of all, a huge Deontay Foreman fan over here. A guy toward his Achilles.
That is the difference between us. I think he's just a guy. He's useful. Yeah. He's a plotter. He's useful, but he's, I think, just a guy.
Toward his Achilles, probably the best evidence running backs come back from it. Love him. Super good. The big problem and the argument against Khalil Herbert starts with Roschon Johnson, and that the regime did not draft Khalil Herbert. They did draft Roschon Johnson. And among all qualifying college running backs last year, I don't know the exact stat, but I know he was like top 10 on third down and pass blocking. Like, he was so good that Texas was taking Bijan Robinson off the field just to have Roschon Johnson in there in pass blocking. And I think that the Chicago Bears are probably going to still have a pretty bad offensive line this year. I know they drafted a rookie, but it looks like Tevin Jenkins isn't even going to be able to play League One, so they're already down a guard, and we haven't even played a snap of football. And even if he is the RB1, he's likely the RB2 because of Justin Fields. But, I mean, probably the biggest difference for you and me, not playing devil's advocate, is that I think that the Chicago offense is going to suck for another year. They're going to probably get rid of Justin Fields. But that's probably a hotter take than a lot of people have.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'm predicting him to be good, but, I'm just, again, this is a guy who was RB 39 while being out-touched by 100 carries by a running back, and then also having the quarterback lead the team in rushing. So I don't think it's crazy to think his situation could actually be better than last year. And it's kind of being painted as he's in a worse spot than last season. And he finished, like I said, 4 spots behind where he's going right now.
Yeah. And I mean, he finished 39 last year. He's 32 on underdog, 1 spot ahead of Antonio Gibson now. So the Sharps are a little in line with you. Mm-hmm. But I think, especially if you're going like 0 running back, I think he's a great target because he's one of those guys that if he does hit, he's immediately going to be a top 20 start every week. You just need him to come out of this committee and Eberflus and Co. to reject having the committee.
Yep, agreed. So Herbert, my number 2, my guy. T. Higgins, number 1, to be clear. We just got flipped on the order, but I am once again in on Herbert. Excited to see how that one shakes out. And just real quick, to answer Cameron's question in the chat, hey, fellas, is it a terrible idea to take Joe Burrow round 1? I am going to say, unless you're in a super flex, yes, it is. even the QB1, Patrick Mahomes, should not be going any higher than like the 2-3 turn is where I would take him. He may go higher than that. That's about where I would take him. So yeah, Dalton, I know you agree that we're not taking any first round shots on a quarterback in a non-super flex.
Yeah, even if I was like the 8th pick and 6 quarterbacks went in front of me, like I don't think like I don't.
If 6 quarterbacks put in front of me, I'd be like, wow, I get Christian McCaffrey or Justin Jefferson
Or Jamar
Chase at 8.
No, and if you're in a league where like a lot of people are drafting 1 or even 2 quarterbacks in the first 5 rounds, just scoop up value everywhere else and take like Brock Purdy as your starting quarterback, because you're going to score so many points everywhere else. It's not going to be a factor.
Yep. Agreed with you there. And that is going to do it for episode 114 of the Half Point Per Podcast. Give us a follow on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Half Point Per Pod. Subscribe to the YouTube as well. Link to all these things in the show notes as always. The show is available anywhere you listen to podcasts, Spotify, Apple, all that good stuff. Leave us a 5-star review. We always appreciate those. Thank you all again so much for listening, and we'll talk to you again next week.